Hello everyone, and welcome to this Xamarin University Lightning Lecture. I'm Jason DeBoever, and I'm here today to introduce the Xamarin.Forms FlexLayout, a new layout in Xamarin.Forms. It's inspired by the Flexbox in CSS HTML, very similar in many ways to the StackLayout we already have in Xamarin.Forms, but with a lot more configurability and power. By the way, if you're not already familiar with layouts in Xamarin.Forms or what the stack layout is and all that, we have lots and lots of classes to explain all that stuff for you at Xamarin University. So check that stuff out. A lot of that content is absolutely free, so please check it out. All right, so I said that things start off similar to a stack layout. And that's true. We have a layout that's going to arrange the children, say buttons and labels and things like that, either from top to bottom or from left to right. Or wait, that's what a stack layout does. But with our flex layout, we can also go bottom to top or right to left. We have row reverse and column reverse as well. So that, by the way, is actually the naming that's in the Flexbox or in the flex layout. We call the property direction, and the possible values are column, that is like our vertical stack layout, or row, that would be like our horizontal stack layout. But in addition to column and row, we have column reverse and row reverse. So like I said, a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more power already. Now for configuring our children along those axes, we have a couple more properties that we can play with. So along the direction, so if we were in a column, for instance, we could use justify to position things along the column. For instance, maybe I want that button to be aligned to the bottom, or to be justified to the bottom. The reason I corrected myself on a line there is because actually, perpendicular to our direction, we have another property called align. And so I can position things perpendicular to my direction along the align axes. Now, one place where things get a lot more powerful than what we can do in the stack layout is in terms of line breaks. So our flex layout has line breaks. You can see that if I have too much content to fit in a single column, then it will simply roll over to another column. Now, that's if I configure it like that. There is actually a wrap property that I can use to either say do wrap or don't wrap. Now, of course, when I'm in rows, this is actually kind of a little bit more intuitive. When you're in a row and you're going left to right, it almost is just like reading. When a word is done and you don't have room for the next word, then you wrap to the next row. That's the normal behavior when you're reading, say, a book or something, or even an article. But this also works with our columns. As you can see, we just break to the next column. It also works with column reverse. So for instance, if I was using column reverse, I could be going this way and break to the next column like so. Now, there's a lot more configurability, quite a lot. But to play with some of that additional configurability, I'd rather get to our code, or at least XAML, rather than focusing on doing this stuff all in slides. So without further ado, to Visual Studio. So what I've got here for you is a completely blank project, just a main page, nothing whatsoever going on. But the only interesting thing is that I do have the NuGet package for Xamarin.Forms 3, which as of this recording is in pre-release. So I did have to actually go to NuGet and get pre-release package for that. Otherwise, this is as empty and boring a completely vanilla project as you could ask for. So let's start out by just adding a flex layout here. Got my flex layout. By the way, I'm in a preview version of Visual Studio, which is giving me this nice XAML IntelliSense, so that also is somewhat new, but should be released any moment. So my flex layout then is going to have a default direction of row. This is actually a little different from our stack layout, which has a default of vertical. So we have a different default in our flex layout. It defaults to row. I'm going to actually set it to column though. And then we'll give it some children. So how about a label that says, welcome to Xamarin.Forms, and then maybe another label says, how about not just repeating welcome, let's say and to Xamarin University. So we've got a couple labels in there. How about a button? Button can say, click me human. Actually, we're gonna wanna put that in the text property. I'm gonna give this a run on Android here. All right, we can see we're going from top to bottom. There's my first label, my next label right there, and then my button, click me human. So we do in fact have exactly what we asked for. Right now, interestingly, my button is completely spanning the width, which actually is the default and is actually probably a pretty darn good default, actually. Technically, my labels are also spanning this full width, although there's just not much to see with the labels. Although if we change, say, a background color, we'd certainly see it. Everything is spanning the full widths. I want to change that. Actually, I am going to add a background color, though, just so we can see things as we're moving forward. So I'll make that green on one of those labels. But I want to take my button and I want to configure that to act a little bit differently. And I can use an attached property here of my flex layout, and that is align self. So I'm going to set that one to, say, actually center. Let's do center here. And I want to compare that. I'm going to change the flex layout. So the reason everything was stretched so far is because the flex layout is set with its align items property to stretch, which is the default. So let's change that one too. Let's set align items to start. So my two labels will be start, but my button will then be in the middle of this one and only column that we have. Let's run that again. All right, so we can see that is aligned to the start of the column in terms of our orientation. So we see that is in reading direction, left to right, or at least left to right language reading direction. So we see that's at the left when I do start. And now this is centered. Now I only have one column. I haven't wrapped any columns. And so center is centered on the one and only column that we have. All right, I'm going to switch us over to Windows in order to also be able to change the size, so we can kind of dynamically see how the things move around as I dynamically change the size. And since I can control my window size with Windows, that allows us to demo that a little bit easier. So now let's play around a little bit with our direction. So let's change this to column reverse. Actually, there's no dash in the version here. Of course, CSS, it's column dash reverse there. All right, so I'm now going to go ahead and give this a run just by changing just that, and we'll see quite dramatic change, actually. All right, so as you can see now, because I set it to column reverse, we've actually started at the bottom of the screen now. And then my second item is above that, and my third item is above that. So quite a drastic difference. And resizing the screen, of course, you can see center is centered, so there's nothing too surprising there. All right, let's change things to row now. We'll play around with that as well. So if I have row, now this is not reverse. This is going to be left to right, so there shouldn't be too many shocking bits with just row. All right, so you can see there's my first item. There's my next item. And now here, so I'm in row. This may look a bit surprising, right? I'm in row. But remember that this is the row now. And so my whole thing is a single row. So with that, this is within the row. This is within the row. So this is the next item in the row. It's just very tall. Each element in the row is very tall. And then this is the third item in my row. It's very tall and it's centered, right? So remember, with my row, I'm going this way. And so my align is perpendicular. So my align is centering perpendicular. All right, so that's my row. And then row reverse, you can probably imagine what's going to happen. We're just going to go from right to left there. And that's a quick demo, so we'll go ahead and show that one as well. Okay, there we have it, from right to left, the things that we have so far created in order. So for now, let's switch things back to column. And so far, everything that we've done with our direction, we've been starting from the logical place. So starting from the top and then working our way down, starting from the left and working our way right. Of course, if we reverse it, then that's reversed. But we actually do have a little bit more control as well over positioning things along that axis, along that main axis, similar to what we've been doing with the alignment. So that is, of course, as I mentioned earlier, our justify. So we have our justify content. And right now it's all set to start. But I can have it set to quite a few different things. We can justify center. So if we want to take a look at justify center, all right, we can see that everything is now centered in our column, right? So this is our single column, of course, goes from top to bottom. And so it's all centered. It's still going from top. This is the green one. Then the next one is here. And now our line on these two is start. So in this orientation, we're over here. And the align on this one, it's still below the other two. So along justification, we're still all centered. and this one is below those. But in the alignment that is perpendicular to that main axis, right, we can see that this one is also centered because we still have that align self center on that. Let's look at a couple more justifies. So space around and space between and space evenly are all fun, just ever so slightly different. So space around basically is sort of like giving them all their own margin that is all exactly the same. And so now we can see that we've set it to space around, and so we can almost imagine a box around them from top to bottom at least, because remember we're talking columns, so we can imagine this box around them, or this even padding, right? And then this and this also have even padding, although it's a little hard to see that. And then there's the human. Now, because I said space around, that's including some padding or margin up at the top here and down at the bottom. Now, space between would be similar, but it would be only between elements. So there's not going to be any padding at the top or any padding at the bottom if I used space between. And then finally, we can use space evenly, which is exactly what it sounds like. Okay, we can see that they're all exactly even. All of the space here, the space here, the space here, and the space here is all equal space there. So we have a lot of flexibility there as well. I'm going to set this back to start, the default. Now let's give us a header. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to add another label here. Actually, let's do a footer. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add another label here and give it a background color so we can see it real clearly. How about just blue? Because I'm boring. All right, and because I'm extra boring, it'll just say I'm a footer. All right, so in order to make this a footer though, I want it to stretch across the entire width, right? And so what I'm going to do is change its FlexLayout.align self. Whoops, missed that one. Align self to stretch. Now, that just makes it below the button though. That doesn't really force it all the way to the bottom of the screen, which is what I want. All right, and so for that, what I'm gonna do is I'm put something in between. It's just going to be a frame, and then the frame is going to be very boring. Essentially, it's meant to be invisible, but it's going to have a FlexLayout.grow. And so anything with a grow is going to automatically fill in extra available space along our direction axes, which in this case, of course, is top to bottom. So this is going to grow to fill in that space, and then the only remaining thing below it is going to be this, and so that will be pinned to the bottom. No matter how much we grow or change the size of the screen, that's going to end up pinned to the bottom. Now, the default for grow is 0. That's why I don't have to worry about any of these others trying to share that space. This is the only thing that's going to grow. So let's go ahead and give this a run and check it out. All right, there is my footer down at the bottom. You can see that everything else is exactly as we've come to expect it, but the footer stretches, so it fills up the entire screen. So that's along the alignment axis is the stretch. Fills up my entire screen there. And then here, I have filling in this space, an empty frame. That gives us that pin to the bottom behavior that we want. So we have that nice footer there. All right, now interestingly, grow has some other interesting properties. It's not just true or false. You can see that grow is set to 1. Now the default is 0, meaning no growing. However, you can actually set this to any integer, meaning you could have something else at grow equals 2, and that thing would grow twice as fast, or its delta in size would be twice as much. So it would grow twice as fast if that was 2 and this is 1. And you can actually have any sort of ratios you want with that. Pretty interesting stuff there. There's also a shrink property. Now, shrink defaults to 1, meaning if you make everything super duper small, everything will try to shrink in order to make room. My UWP doesn't actually allow me to shrink a window quite that small, but if we had a very, 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 very large label and then we started shrinking this, it would in fact shrink by default. We would have to set shrink equals 0 if we wanted it to not. So grow defaults to 0, but shrink defaults to 1. Both of them are changeable, but those are the defaults. All right, now we're going to play around with this this footer here actually and do some crazy things. What I'm going to do, I'm going to keep it a footer, but I'm going to move it up. So how is it a footer now? Well, it's not right now. Actually, right now, everything would end up at the bottom of the screen. There's another property we have called order. Now, order works a little bit differently than you might intuit. So let's get this set, and there's my order. What I'm actually going to do is set this to 1. And then my label here, FlexLayout.order, I'm going to set to 2. Now, everything else has their default order of, it's 0. It's not actually, 0, 1, 2, 3, as you might expect. Instead, the default value is 0. Everything with the same value for order will be laid out in the order it was defined. Now, this may seem like completely unnecessary and like a super edge casey sort of thing, but the reason I like this is because what it allows me to do is if I wanted to have some static content, things that were always the same, I could define those in my markup, my XAML, just like this, right? And then I can later add dynamic content. So I can just FlexLayout.children.add, FlexLayout.children.add, FlexLayout.children.add. And I don't have to worry about positioning and checking where things are. I will just have set these, because they're static, even though they're at the bottom, by using the order, I can just set them like that and forget it. And then I can have code dynamically adding these other elements later. What that means is this should look exactly the same as the thing we just demoed before. All right, it looks exactly the same and should act exactly the same. All right, excellent. Let's go super small. I'm checking to see how small that's going to go for me, because for our next demo, we're going to start doing line breaks. In order to turn on our multi-line or our wrapping layout, what we're going to do is go to the Flex Layout and turn the wrap property to wrap. Notice there's also no wrap and reverse. So reverse is kind of like the way column reverse works or row reverse works. If we have our wrap set to reverse, it would actually start the first column on the right-hand side. And then the next column would be left of that. Or if we had our direction set to row, but our wrap to reverse, it would obviously take those rows and start them at the bottom, and then the next row would be above it. All right, so that's what that is. It's how it works. It kind of depends a little bit on what direction you're using. So we've set wrap, but we don't actually have enough content yet that anything's going to bother wrapping. If I run it right now, it'll look exactly the same. I don't have more than a single column's worth of content. Now, of course, I can start setting up a whole bunch of extra controls, but there's something else that I'm going to show you that we can do. There's a property called basis. So let's go set up our FlexLayout.basis on a few of these elements here. So set my FlexLayout.basis. I'm going to set it to 400. That's using our Xamarin.Forms units, which depends slightly on what platform you're running on, how those get evaluated. For instance, those are device-independent pixels with a translation factor applied on Android, and their points on iOS. But this is the Xamarin.Forms unit. And I'm going to use, actually, let's make that just a little bit smaller, maybe 350. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing on maybe my other label here. And let's go ahead and run that. That should be enough that if we shrink our screen, we can at least make things start to try wrapping. All right, so right now they're still in a single column. Everything is still managing to fit just fine in a single column. If I start to change the size though, things are getting different. We start to break a little bit, and now, so you can see it's wrapping. The footer is having its own hard time deciding where it fits. That right there, that means that because it's on the top, right now actually this means that my frame, because my frame, it doesn't have very much intrinsic size, it's just set to grow. So it's actually fitting right there. It's fitting just below that button. As I squeeze things just a little bit more, now the frame comes over here, and that grow is relative to its own column, or it would be row if we were in row. And so as soon as it comes over here, all of a sudden it's got this tremendous amount of space to grow, and so it's filling up this entire area here. And the other interesting thing, and let's see, my button here just moved itself over as well. So my button is now in my new column here. So we can see that things are wrapping over to the new column, almost creating what might be a two-column article type format. So if you're reading an article, you could be reading like this, and it would flow over to that next column perfectly easily. So that would work really well for that sort of format. Let's go ahead and stop this. Now, I want to show you one other really cool thing we can do with this basis and with our wrap. So I'm going to create another, actually, let's do this. I'm going to create a stack layout here. We're going to make this almost like it's a left-hand menu. So I'm going to create a stack layout here, and this stack layout is going to have, well, a couple labels in it. So we'll have a label that says, almost like this is a menu, right? So I'm just going to set this to just some string. Let's give this a width request to make sure it shows up something of a reasonable size, and then let's just copy and paste these because we don't really need them to actually be different. We just want something that sort of looks like a menu, right? All right, so I've got my stack layout here, and now what I'm going to do, actually, let's give this a background color of fuchsia, because fuchsia is always a fun color to work with. And now I'm going to set the FlexLayout.basis of this, right? FlexLayout.basis is how we said that we wanted this to be 350 tall. Now, a little bit more background on basis here. So I said this is in terms of our Xamarin.Forms units. So basis is the size you want it to be along the primary axis. Now, of course, with our column layout, that also corresponds to our height in Xamarin.Forms. We have a height request. Now, if I'd set basis to auto, A-U-T-O, it would fall back to our height request. But FlexLayout itself has this basis property. And again, this is actually just a property that is inherited from the CSS roots of the FlexLayout. The FlexLayout, this conforms to the specification for that CSS Flexbox. And so it includes this basis. We can set this to auto in order to get it to fall back to our height request. But what basis has that's different is it's not just something we can set to height like this. I can set my basis, and what I'm going to do here is set this to 100%. And so now this is going to fill one complete total column. This will be one column, so it'll act almost like a left-hand menu would. And then this, the rest of this, then, is going to fill out the rest of the space however it finds room. So let's go ahead and run things here. All right, so we can see that we've got our left-hand column. It looks like we may have something else filling up some space in there, or actually need to play a little bit perhaps with our align content. So align content is how we actually tell the columns themselves in case of column 2 wrap. So align items says within a column, are you at the start, are you at the end, are you centered in a column? Align content would tell our columns themselves how to act. And so right now we may, for instance, have it set to space between. I don't really recall what the default there is, but it looks like we might want to play with that just a little bit. So I'll set this to align content start, and that should put them all to the left there. We'll run that again. It might bunch them up a little bit, but that's essentially because our button and our labels here just don't have that much width to them. So if we wanted to do things like set the width to stretch those out to fill up the rest of our screen, we certainly could do that. Okay, there you have it. So there's our kind of left menu bar simulated, and then our other stuff here laid out. And I can, of course, then start changing the size and see the other columns roll as they need to and flow as they need to. This one, because it's 100%, it's just always 100% of the available size, regardless of how much that is. All right, I hope you all enjoyed my quick tour around the new Flex layout. That's all I have for you for now, but the CSS feature that's being introduced at the same time plays really, really nicely with our Flex layout. We have a separate lightning lecture for that one. Additionally, Flex layout is really, really nice for doing dynamic or responsive design, changing the design if you're in portrait versus landscape mode, or if you're doing a lot of these different size changes like we were doing with our desktop. You can have things done with the Visual State Manager or triggers that can, for instance, change your ordering or change how much you're flowing or wrapping your columns. So there's a lot of power there. The docs will explain a lot more about that. So check out the Xamarin.Forms docs for our Flex layout. And that Visual State Manager feature I just mentioned, also brand new, really useful with the Flex layout. And we have yet another lightning lecture for that one. So also check that out. Folks, that's all I have for now. Thank you so much for joining me for this lightning lecture. Bye for now.